What if everything you learned about Jesus in Sunday school was deliberately designed to keep you from discovering the most revolutionary spiritual truth ever documented in human history? But before we begin, please hit the like button and let me know where in the world you're watching from today. It's always fascinating seeing who's joining us from around the world. Picture this: a devout Christian Sunday school teacher, so committed to his faith that he taught Bible classes his entire life, suddenly finds himself channeling information that would shake the very foundations of organized religion. This wasn't some rebellious mystic trying to tear down Christianity. This was Edgar Cayce, America's most documented psychic, a man who risked his reputation, his livelihood, and everything he held sacred to share revelations that directly contradicted 2,000 years of established Christian doctrine. Has this ever happened to you? That moment when you discover something so profound, so earth-shattering, that it forces you to question everything you thought you knew? That's exactly what happened when Cayce entered his famous trance states and began channeling information about Jesus Christ that would challenge every sermon you've ever heard, every hymn you've ever sung, and every prayer you've ever whispered. Through over 16,000 meticulously recorded readings, this sleeping prophet, as he came to be known, revealed truths about Christ that seminary schools still refuse to teach, that church leaders still won't acknowledge, and that could fundamentally transform your entire understanding of what Christianity was truly meant to be. The courage required to challenge religious orthodoxy while maintaining personal faith demonstrates just how profound and undeniable the information flowing through Cayce must have been. What you're about to discover might surprise you, because these aren't the ramblings of some fringe spiritual movement or the theories of rebellious theologians. These revelations are preserved in the archives of the Institute for Spiritual Research and Development in Ocean City, documented with scientific precision, cataloged with meticulous care, and containing information so revolutionary that it could completely transform not just your understanding of Christianity, but your entire perception of spirituality itself. Think about the implications for a moment. What if the missing years in Jesus' life weren't actually missing, but deliberately concealed? What if the man we call Christ had lived multiple lifetimes, progressively preparing for his ultimate mission? What if everything the church taught you about salvation, about heaven, about the very nature of your soul, was just a fragment of a much larger, more empowering truth? The careful documentation and preservation of these readings ensures that future generations can access these challenging but potentially transformative teachings, even as religious institutions continue to resist them. Every word that emerged from Cayce's lips during those trance states was recorded by his faithful stenographer, creating an unprecedented archive of spiritual revelation that mainstream Christianity has spent decades trying to ignore or discredit. Stay with me until the end, because what emerged from those sessions in Ocean City wasn't just alternative interpretations of familiar Bible stories. It was a complete cosmic roadmap that reveals Jesus Christ's true mission, his actual teachings before they were edited by early church councils, and most shocking of all, the revolutionary spiritual practices he taught his closest disciples that could awaken the same divine consciousness within you. This isn't about destroying faith. It's about discovering what authentic faith was always meant to be. It's about understanding why a devoted Christian like Edgar Cayce felt compelled to risk everything to preserve these revelations, and why the information that flowed through him continues to challenge, inspire, and transform lives nearly a century later. The question isn't whether you're ready to hear these revelations. The question is whether you're brave enough to let them change everything you thought you knew about the most influential figure in human history. The transformation in Edgar Cayce's life reveals something profound about the nature of authentic spiritual discovery. Here was a man who had built his entire identity around traditional Christian teachings, someone whose mindset was so deeply rooted in conventional faith that he dedicated his life to sharing Bible stories with children every Sunday. Yet when he began accessing these deeper revelations, he faced an impossible decision that would test the very core of his beliefs. Behind the scenes of Cayce's most controversial work lies a fascinating paradox that few people truly understand. This wasn't a man trying to tear down Christianity or destroy anyone's faith. The hidden truth is far more complex and, in many ways, more beautiful. Casey was actually attempting to restore Christianity to something he believed it had lost along the way, its original, uncorrupted essence that had been buried under centuries of institutional interpretation and political manipulation. Think about the courage that required. Imagine being so committed to preserving authentic spiritual truth that you're willing to challenge the very institutions that shaped your worldview. This paradox highlights something crucial about genuine spiritual seekers. Sometimes the greatest act of faith is questioning the structures that claim to represent that faith. Casey's journey wasn't about rebellion, it was about restoration, about peeling back layers of dogma to reveal what he believed Jesus actually taught before it was filtered through human agendas. The impact of this internal struggle becomes even more profound when you consider what happened during one particular session that would change everything. Ocean City, 1947, a date that would become legendary among those who study Casey's work. Martha Collins, his faithful stenographer who had been documenting these extraordinary sessions for over 3 decades, sat ready with her pen poised, completely unaware that she was about to transcribe one of the most controversial readings in spiritual history. The meticulous documentation process that Collins had perfected over the years ensured that every word, every pause, every nuance that emerged from Casey's unconscious mind would be preserved exactly as it occurred. This wasn't casual note-taking or rough interpretation. This was scientific-level precision applied to mystical revelation. Collins understood that she wasn't just recording interesting ideas, she was preserving potential spiritual dynamite that could reshape how humanity understands its relationship with the divine. As Casey entered that familiar trance state, something different was happening. The question that had been posed to his unconscious mind that day would push the boundaries of acceptable spiritual discourse further than ever before. What emerged from his lips during those pivotal moments would challenge not just individual beliefs, but the entire foundation upon which organized religion had built its authority for nearly 2 millennia. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic, because what happened next reveals something extraordinary about the true nature of Jesus' mission that goes far beyond traditional religious teaching. The revelations that poured through Casey during this session painted a picture of Christ that was simultaneously more human and more divine than anything the church had ever dared to suggest. Write in the comments, "I'm ready for the truth," if you're prepared to explore these revelations that could transform your entire understanding of spirituality. What emerged from Casey's lips during that transformative session in Ocean City would shatter 25 centuries of carefully constructed religious doctrine and reveal a cosmic story so vast, so all-encompassing, that it makes traditional Christianity look like a single chapter in an epic novel that spans the entirety of human spiritual evolution. The implications of these revelations extend far beyond simple religious reform. They suggest a complete reframing of humanity's spiritual journey and our ultimate purpose in the universe. The hidden truth that Casey channeled that day was both shocking and strangely logical once you really think about it. Behind the scenes of the familiar gospel narratives lies a story that your church probably never shared with you, not because they were deliberately hiding it, but because acknowledging it would require a fundamental transformation in how we understand the nature of spiritual mastery itself. According to Casey's documented reading, the Jesus we think we know, the one who appeared suddenly in Palestine as a fully formed spiritual teacher, had actually spent nearly 3 decades traveling the world, studying with masters in Persia, Nepal, and ancient Babylon, before he ever began the ministry that would change history. This revelation completely transforms our understanding of Christ from a divinely inspired teacher who appeared out of nowhere to a dedicated student who earned his extraordinary wisdom through extensive spiritual education and disciplined practice. Think about the impact this has on your entire mindset about spiritual development. If Jesus himself needed to journey across continents, learning from various wisdom traditions, studying ancient texts, and practicing with seasoned masters. What does that tell us about the path to spiritual enlightenment? It suggests that even the most elevated souls must go through a process of growth, learning, and transformation, rather than simply being born with perfect knowledge. This behind-the-scenes look at Jesus's preparation period reveals something profound about the nature of spiritual mastery. The missing years weren't actually missing. They were deliberately omitted from the official record because they showed Jesus as a seeker, a student, someone who made conscious decisions to pursue wisdom wherever it could be found. This version of Christ's story is simultaneously more human and more inspiring, because it shows that spiritual greatness comes through dedication and continuous learning rather than miraculous birth. The journey that Casey described paints a picture of Jesus moving through different cultures, absorbing various spiritual practices, and integrating the deepest wisdom of multiple traditions before returning to Palestine with a universal message that transcended any single religious framework. This explains why his teachings resonated so powerfully across different cultures and why authentic spiritual principles can be found in various forms throughout different wisdom traditions worldwide. Now I want to explore something even more revolutionary that emerged from these same readings, because what Casey revealed about Jesus's previous lifetimes completely redefines our understanding of spiritual evolution and suggests that the soul we know as Christ had been preparing for this ultimate mission across multiple incarnations, each one building the consciousness necessary to become the perfect channel for divine love. Write in the comments, this changes everything. If you're beginning to see how these revelations transform our understanding of spiritual development, the transformation in how we understand these missing years becomes even more significant when you realize they weren't actually missing at all. Behind the scenes of early Christianity's formation, church authorities made calculated decisions to deliberately obscure these travels because they couldn't reconcile Christ's universal teachings with their growing desire for religious exclusivity. The hidden truth is that the systematic editing of spiritual history reveals something disturbing about how institutional power often corrupts authentic spiritual teachings for political and social control. Think about the mindset that would drive such decisions. These early church leaders faced a profound dilemma: acknowledge that Jesus had learned from multiple wisdom traditions and risk people seeking truth in various places, or create a narrative that positioned Christianity as the only path to salvation. The impact of choosing exclusivity over authenticity has shaped religious thinking for nearly 2 millennia, creating artificial barriers between spiritual traditions that Jesus himself had embraced and integrated. This deliberate concealment becomes even more shocking when you consider what else Casey revealed during those extraordinary readings. The journey of the soul we know as Jesus didn't begin with his birth in Palestine. It had been unfolding across multiple lifetimes, each incarnation carefully building the spiritual consciousness necessary to eventually become the perfect channel for divine love. According to Casey's revelations, Jesus had previously incarnated as Abel, Ezekiel, and Zadok, among others, progressively developing the wisdom and compassion that would define his ultimate mission. This revolutionary concept completely transforms Christianity from a singular divine intervention to a carefully orchestrated cosmic plan spanning countless centuries. The implications for your own spiritual journey are staggering. If the soul we revere as the Christ consciousness required multiple lifetimes of growth and learning, what does that say about the nature of spiritual development for all of us? The behind-the-scenes reality that Casey channeled suggests that perfection isn't achieved instantly, but earned through dedication across numerous incarnations. This fundamentally shifts our understanding from Jesus as an unreachable divine figure to Jesus as the ultimate example of what persistent spiritual evolution can accomplish. Every lifetime provided opportunities for growth, for learning, for making decisions that would contribute to the eventual emergence of perfect love expressing through human form. What makes this revelation so transformative is how it democratizes the spiritual path. Rather than worshiping an unattainable Savior, we're invited to follow the same journey of growth that Jesus himself traveled. The Hidden truth is that Christ consciousness isn't reserved for one special soul. It's the destination toward which all spiritual evolution is moving, lifetime after lifetime, choice after choice, transformation after transformation. Now, I want to reveal something even more profound that emerged from these readings, because what Casey discovered about the true purpose of Jesus' crucifixion and resurrection completely redefines our understanding of salvation itself, shifting it from external rescue to internal awakening in ways that could revolutionize your entire approach to spiritual growth. Write in the comments, "I understand now," if these revelations about Jesus' spiritual evolution are beginning to transform your perspective on your own spiritual journey. The profound implications of this multi-lifetime journey reveal something that completely transforms how we approach our own spiritual development. Jesus wasn't born perfect. He achieved perfection through numerous lifetimes of dedicated spiritual evolution, just as all souls must do. This revelation shifts his role from an unattainable savior to something far more empowering, a way-shower who demonstrates the path that every consciousness can eventually walk. This understanding democratizes the entire spiritual journey in ways that traditional Christianity never dared to imagine. The hidden truth is that divine consciousness isn't reserved for one special being who descended from heaven. It's achievable through dedication and multiple lifetime experiences, making Jesus' accomplishment both more remarkable and more accessible. Behind the scenes of his apparent perfection lies the same process of growth, learning, and transformation that every soul undergoes. The impact of this mindset shift cannot be overstated. Instead of worshiping from a distance, we're invited to follow the same path of evolution that Jesus traveled. Every decision you make, every act of compassion you choose, every moment of forgiveness you offer, becomes part of your own journey toward the same Christ consciousness that he ultimately embodied. But here's where the story takes a fascinating turn that reveals just how deeply this message has been misunderstood throughout history. Casey's reading described a soul who had been physically present during Jesus' teachings in ancient Palestine, someone who had the extraordinary opportunity to learn directly from Christ himself. Yet this person completely missed the point, believing that following Jesus meant passive worship rather than active spiritual development. This fundamental misunderstanding has persisted for millennia, creating religions focused on devotion rather than personal transformation and spiritual growth. The journey that Jesus modeled, one of continuous learning, dedication, and evolution, was replaced by a system that encouraged believers to remain spiritually passive, waiting for salvation to come from outside themselves, rather than awakening the divine potential within. Think about how this misinterpretation has shaped modern spirituality. Instead of seeing Jesus as proof of what human consciousness can achieve through dedication and spiritual practice, mainstream Christianity positioned him as a unique divine figure whose accomplishments were impossible for ordinary souls to replicate. This decision to emphasize his divinity while downplaying the evolutionary process that created that divinity has kept millions of sincere seekers trapped in dependency rather than empowered toward their own spiritual mastery. The revelation that emerges from Casey's work suggests that Jesus never intended to be the object of worship, but rather the ultimate example of what persistent spiritual development could accomplish. His message wasn't, "Worship me," but "Follow this path and you can become what I have become." Now, I want to explore what Casey revealed about the true meaning of the crucifixion and resurrection, because these events weren't primarily about saving humanity from sin, but about demonstrating something far more revolutionary about the nature of consciousness itself and our relationship to physical death. Write in the comments, "I'm ready to evolve," if you're beginning to understand that your own spiritual journey follows the same evolutionary path that Jesus demonstrated. The transformation in understanding becomes even more radical when you realize that Jesus never intended to be worshipped at all. Behind the scenes of his entire ministry was a completely different agenda than what traditional Christianity teaches. The hidden truth that emerged from Casey's readings reveals that Jesus came to show humanity what everyone could become through dedication to spiritual growth and service to others, not to establish himself as an object of devotion. This radical reframing challenges the entire foundation of traditional Christianity, shifting the focus from external worship to internal development. Think about the profound impact this has on your spiritual mindset. Instead of spending your life looking upward in reverence to an unreachable figure, you're invited to look inward toward the same divine potential that Jesus successfully awakened within himself. The journey that Jesus modeled wasn't about creating followers who would spend eternity praising him. It was about creating other beings who could achieve the same level of consciousness he had attained. Every miracle he performed, every teaching he shared, every moment of compassion he demonstrated was designed to show you what becomes possible when a soul fully commits to spiritual evolution. But perhaps the most revolutionary revelation that Casey channeled concerns the true meaning behind the crucifixion itself. According to these extraordinary readings, the crucifixion wasn't primarily about dying for humanity's sins, but about demonstrating the soul's ultimate triumph over physical death and material limitation. The decision that Jesus made to undergo this experience was far more strategic and empowering than traditional theology suggests. Casey's reading revealed that Jesus chose crucifixion and resurrection to prove definitively that consciousness survives physical death, and that what we call miracles are simply natural expressions of spiritual laws that humanity has forgotten how to access. This completely transforms our understanding of that pivotal moment in history, from a sacrificial payment for sin to a cosmic demonstration of consciousness transcending physical reality. The behind-the-scenes reality of the crucifixion becomes a teaching about the true nature of existence itself. Jesus wasn't showing us that he was uniquely divine. He was proving that consciousness is fundamentally indestructible, and that physical death is simply a transition rather than an ending. The resurrection wasn't about Jesus being special. It was about demonstrating what every consciousness can ultimately achieve when it fully understands its true nature. This revelation has staggering implications for how you view your own existence. If consciousness truly survives physical death, if the soul is fundamentally eternal, then everything about how you approach life, death, and spiritual development changes completely. The fears that keep most people trapped in limited thinking lose their power when you understand that your essential self is indestructible. Now, I want to reveal something even more profound that Casey discovered about what Jesus actually taught regarding reincarnation, because this doctrine was systematically removed from Christianity by early church councils who feared it would undermine their authority and make people responsible for their own spiritual evolution. Write in the comments, "Consciousness is eternal," if you're beginning to understand how Jesus' demonstration of resurrection reveals the indestructible nature of your own soul. The transformation in understanding. Salvation itself becomes the cornerstone of everything Casey revealed about Jesus' true mission. According to these profound readings, Jesus didn't save humanity from sins through sacrifice. He saved us from ignorance by demonstrating our divine potential in ways that no one had ever witnessed before. This completely reframes the entire concept of salvation from external rescue to internal awakening, empowering individuals to take responsibility for their spiritual development rather than depending on intervention from outside themselves. Think about the radical shift in mindset this creates. Instead of being fallen creatures desperately needing rescue, you become a divine being temporarily forgetting your true nature and gradually remembering your way back to conscious unity with universal love. The journey isn't about escaping punishment for inherent sinfulness. It's about awakening from the ignorance that keeps you from recognizing the extraordinary spiritual potential that already exists within your consciousness. Behind the scenes of traditional salvation doctrine lies this hidden truth that Jesus was actually demonstrating what every soul could eventually achieve. His life wasn't about being uniquely special. It was about showing that the barriers we perceive between human and divine consciousness are completely artificial constructs that dissolve when spiritual evolution reaches sufficient depth. The resurrection takes on an entirely different meaning when viewed through this lens. It wasn't about Jesus being uniquely divine, but about proving definitively that death has no power over consciousness, and that all souls possess the same divine nature he exemplified. This revelation elevates every human being to the same spiritual potential, removing the artificial barriers that organized religion has constructed between the divine and humanity. The impact of this understanding on your personal spiritual journey cannot be overstated. Every moment of forgiveness you offer, every act of compassion you express, every decision to choose love over fear becomes part of your own resurrection process, not waiting for some future event, but actively participating in the same transformation that Jesus demonstrated 2,000 years ago. What makes this revelation so empowering is how it positions you not as a passive recipient of divine grace, but as an active participant in cosmic evolution. The same consciousness that enabled Jesus to heal the sick, raise the dead, and ultimately transcend physical death exists within you, waiting to be awakened through dedication and spiritual practice. The behind-the-scenes reality is that Jesus wasn't trying to be worshipped as the only Son of God. He was trying to awaken you to your own divine sonship, your own capacity for miraculous expression, your own potential for conscious immortality. Now, I want to explore what may be the most controversial revelation of all that emerged from Casey's readings, because what he discovered about Jesus actually teaching reincarnation as a fundamental spiritual principle, and how this doctrine was systematically removed by early church councils, completely transforms our understanding of spiritual justice and personal responsibility. Write in the comments, "I am divine too," if you're ready to embrace the same spiritual potential that Jesus came to reveal within every soul. The most controversial revelation that emerged from Casey's readings strikes at the very heart of Christian doctrine in ways that explain why religious institutions have fought so hard to suppress it. According to reading 48516, Jesus actually taught reincarnation as a fundamental spiritual principle, but this teaching was systematically removed by early church councils, who recognized that it would completely undermine their growing authority over people's spiritual lives. Think about the transformation in mindset this creates. The suppression of reincarnation doctrine wasn't accidental. It was a calculated decision that allowed religious institutions to maintain control by making salvation dependent on church membership rather than personal evolution. Behind the scenes of early Christianity's formation, powerful leaders made strategic choices to edit out any teachings that would make individuals responsible for their own spiritual development across multiple lifetimes. The hidden truth is that when people understand they have numerous opportunities to grow and evolve spiritually, they become less dependent on institutional salvation and more focused on personal transformation. This shift in consciousness represents exactly the kind of spiritual empowerment that threatened the emerging church hierarchy's desire for control over believers' spiritual destinies. What makes this revelation even more profound is how it reframes Jesus's most famous teachings. His references to being born again weren't metaphorical descriptions of a single, spiritual awakening. They were literal descriptions of the soul's journey through multiple lifetimes towards spiritual perfection. This understanding provides practical hope for spiritual development across many incarnations rather than creating impossible pressure for perfection within a single existence. The impact of this hidden teaching transforms your entire approach to spiritual growth. Instead of feeling overwhelmed by the gap between your current consciousness and the Christ consciousness that Jesus demonstrated, you can understand that spiritual evolution happens gradually across numerous lifetimes, with each incarnation providing new opportunities for learning, growth, and service. This journey perspective explains why some souls seem naturally drawn to spiritual truth, while others appear completely uninterested. Behind the scenes of apparent spiritual inequality lies a system of perfect justice where every soul gets exactly the experiences needed for continued evolution, with some souls simply being at different stages of their multi-lifetime development process. The decision to remove reincarnation from Christian doctrine created artificial urgency around salvation that served institutional interests, but contradicted the patient, evolutionary approach that Jesus actually taught. When you understand that spiritual development happens across multiple incarnations, the fear-based evangelism that characterizes much of modern Christianity becomes completely unnecessary. Now, I want to reveal what Casey discovered about the actual meditation and spiritual practices that Jesus taught his closest disciples, because these techniques for awakening Christ consciousness within yourself are completely different from the passive worship that organized religion encourages today. Write in the comments, multiple lifetimes make sense, if you're beginning to understand how reincarnation provides the perfect framework for gradual spiritual evolution toward Christ consciousness. The transformation in understanding becomes even more compelling when you realize that documented historical evidence actually exists to support these revelations. Behind the scenes of biblical compilation, early Christian texts that didn't make it into the official Bible contain clear references to reincarnation, karma, and the soul's pre-existence. Casey's readings consistently pointed to these suppressed teachings, revealing how the deliberate editing of spiritual texts demonstrates the ongoing conflict between institutional authority and authentic spiritual truth. Think about the impact this has on your entire approach to spiritual history. The hidden truth is that the Bible you know today represents only a carefully curated selection of available spiritual texts, with church councils making strategic decisions about which teachings would support their growing institutional power, and which would threaten it by empowering individual spiritual development. The journey of discovering these suppressed teachings reveals something profound about how spiritual authority operates. When people understand that they have multiple lifetimes to develop spiritually, that their current circumstances result from previous choices, and that they possess inherent divine potential, they become far less dependent on external religious institutions for their spiritual salvation. This behind-the-scenes editing process completely transforms how we understand some of Jesus's most challenging teachings. When he said, "Be ye therefore perfect, even as your Father in heaven is perfect," he wasn't giving an impossible command designed to create guilt and spiritual inadequacy. He was describing the ultimate goal of soul evolution through many lifetimes, making what seems impossible suddenly achievable through patient, persistent spiritual development. The mindset shift this creates is extraordinary. Instead of feeling crushed by the gap between your current spiritual state and divine perfection, you can understand that spiritual evolution happens gradually across numerous incarnations. Every act of kindness, every moment of forgiveness, every decision to choose love over fear becomes part of a longer journey toward the same consciousness that Jesus ultimately achieved. This reframing removes the guilt and impossibility from spiritual commandments, transforming them from sources of religious anxiety into practical goals for long-term development. The pressure to achieve instant spiritual perfection dissolves when you understand that even Jesus required multiple lifetimes to reach the consciousness he demonstrated during his Palestinian ministry. The hidden truth that emerges from this understanding is that spiritual commands weren't meant to highlight human inadequacy, but to provide direction for soul evolution across time. Every challenging teaching becomes a roadmap rather than a judgment, pointing toward possibilities that exist within your eventual spiritual development. Now, I want to explore something even more practical that Casey revealed about the specific meditation techniques and spiritual practices that Jesus actually taught his closest disciples, because these methods for awakening Christ consciousness within yourself are radically different from the passive worship that characterizes most modern Christianity. Write in the comments, "Perfection is possible," if you're beginning to understand how soul evolution across lifetimes makes Jesus's most challenging teachings actually achievable. The transformation in understanding Jesus's most profound teaching reveals something that completely revolutionizes your approach to spiritual development. When Jesus spoke about the kingdom of heaven being within you, this wasn't metaphorical language designed to inspire hope. It was a literal description of divine consciousness existing within every soul, waiting to be awakened through dedicated spiritual practice. The hidden truth is that this internal focus eliminates the need for external religious authority and places spiritual power directly within your individual experience. Think about the radical shift in mindset this creates. Behind the scenes of traditional Christianity's emphasis on church attendance, religious ceremonies, and institutional salvation lies this revolutionary teaching that everything you need for spiritual transformation already exists within your own consciousness. The journey isn't about finding God in some distant heaven. It's about awakening to the divine presence that has always been at the core of your being. This revelation completely transforms how you approach spiritual practice. Instead of looking upward for salvation or outward to religious authorities for guidance, you're invited to turn inward to discover the same source of wisdom, love, and healing power that Jesus accessed during his ministry. The impact of this understanding is that every moment becomes an opportunity for direct spiritual experience rather than mediated religious observance. But here's where Casey's revelations become intensely practical. Reading 394:31 documented the specific technique that Jesus actually taught his closest disciples, and it's remarkably different from anything you'll hear in modern churches. This attunement meditation involves daily quiet focus on the spiritual ideal of unconditional love expressing through service to others, not as abstract theology, but as concrete steps for awakening the same consciousness that Jesus demonstrated. The behind-the-scenes reality of Jesus's actual spiritual instruction was intensely practical rather than mystically vague. This technique provides a clear pathway for spiritual development that doesn't require complex theological understanding or religious intermediaries. You simply set aside time each morning to attune your consciousness to the same loving awareness that Jesus embodied, allowing that divine quality to gradually transform how you think, feel, and interact with the world. What makes this practice so revolutionary is how it shifts your entire approach from passive worship to active spiritual development. Instead of praying to Jesus for help, you're learning to commune with the same divine consciousness that both you and Jesus share. The decision to practice this attunement consistently begins awakening spiritual abilities that most people never realize they possess. The hidden truth that emerges from this practice is that Christ consciousness isn't something you achieve through belief or religious performance. It's something you gradually embody through consistent alignment with the spiritual principles Jesus demonstrated. Now, I want to share something that will absolutely transform your understanding of what's possible through this practice, because Casey documented actual cases of people who began experiencing miraculous healing abilities after practicing this attunement meditation, proving that the same spiritual gifts Jesus demonstrated are genuinely accessible to anyone willing to commit to this inner work. Write in the comments, "The kingdom is within me," if you're ready to begin practicing this direct path to awakening Christ consciousness in your own life. The transformation from passive worship to active spiritual development represents perhaps the most radical departure from everything organized religion teaches about the spiritual path. The crucial difference that institutional Christianity lost completely is this: the practice isn't about praying to Jesus for help, but about awakening the same Christ consciousness within yourself that Jesus demonstrated during his ministry. This fundamental shift from external dependence to internal development represents the core difference between authentic spirituality and institutional religion. Think about the profound impact this has on your entire approach to spiritual growth. Behind the scenes of traditional religious practice lies this hidden truth that you're not meant to remain a spiritual child forever, depending on external saviors for your spiritual well-being. The journey that Jesus modeled was one of progressive awakening to your own divine potential, not permanent dependency on his intercession. The mindset shift this creates transforms every aspect of your spiritual practice. Instead of asking Jesus to heal you, you learn to express the same loving consciousness that enabled his healing ministry. Instead of requesting divine intervention, you develop the same spiritual awareness that made miracles natural expressions of Jesus's consciousness. The decision to approach spirituality this way awakens abilities that most people never realize exist within them. But here's where these revelations move from theory to documented reality. The archives contain a remarkable case of a woman who had been practicing this attunement meditation for several years and began experiencing something extraordinary. She started manifesting spontaneous healing abilities, not through prayer to Jesus, but through expressing the same loving consciousness he had demonstrated. Her transformation wasn't based on religious faith, but on practical spiritual development that awakened dormant capacities within her own soul. When she requested a reading from Casey about this experience, the response confirmed something that completely revolutionizes our understanding of spiritual gifts. Casey explained that she was awakening spiritual abilities that all souls possess, but that most never develop because they remain focused on external worship rather than internal cultivation. The hidden truth is that what we call miraculous healing is actually a natural expression of consciousness that has been sufficiently purified and aligned with divine love. This documented case reveals something profound about the true purpose of Jesus' ministry. He wasn't performing miracles to prove his unique divinity. He was demonstrating what becomes possible when any soul commits fully to spiritual development. The behind-the-scenes reality is that every healing he performed was intended as a teaching about your own potential, rather than evidence of his exclusive supernatural powers. The impact of understanding this shifts your entire relationship with spiritual phenomena. Instead of viewing miracles as external interventions from a distant God, you begin recognizing them as natural expressions of consciousness that has remembered its true nature and learned to operate according to spiritual laws rather than material limitations. Now, I want to explore what may be the most shocking revelation of all that emerged from Casey's readings, because what he discovered about Jesus continuing to incarnate on Earth to guide humanity's spiritual evolution completely transforms our understanding of the Second Coming and reveals why authentic spiritual teachers appear throughout history to correct religious distortions. Write in the comments, "I can heal too," if you're beginning to understand that the same spiritual abilities Jesus demonstrated are accessible through dedicated inner development. The most shocking revelation that emerged from Casey's readings completely transforms everything you think you know about Jesus' ongoing relationship with humanity. In reading 674-2010, Casey stated something that challenges 2 millennia of Christian expectation. Jesus continues incarnating on Earth, working behind the scenes to guide humanity's spiritual evolution and correct the religious distortions that have accumulated around his original teachings. Think about the profound transformation in mindset this creates. The hidden truth is that the Second Coming isn't some future event where Jesus dramatically appears in the clouds. It's an ongoing process of spiritual guidance through multiple incarnations across history. Behind the scenes of human spiritual development, the same consciousness that expressed as Jesus in Palestine has been returning repeatedly, each time working to restore authentic spiritual teachings that institutional Christianity has corrupted or lost. This revelation suggests that the soul we knew as Jesus has been making strategic decisions to incarnate throughout history whenever humanity's spiritual evolution needed course correction. The journey of consciousness that achieved Christ awareness during that famous Palestinian ministry hasn't been sitting passively in heaven, waiting for the right moment to return. It's been actively participating in humanity's ongoing spiritual transformation. But here's where this understanding becomes even more revolutionary. Casey suggested that many of the great spiritual reformers throughout history have actually been Jesus returning in different forms to restore the authentic spiritual teachings that organized religion systematically corrupted. This provides a completely new framework for recognizing genuine spiritual authority across different traditions and historical periods. The impact of this perspective transforms how you understand spiritual history itself. Instead of viewing various wisdom traditions as separate or competing paths, you begin recognizing them as different expressions of the same consciousness, working to awaken humanity to its divine potential. The behind-the-scenes reality is that authentic spiritual teachers throughout history have been part of a coordinated effort to preserve and restore the universal truths that Jesus originally taught. This understanding explains why genuine spiritual wisdom appears consistently across different cultures and time periods, often challenging the religious establishments of their day. The hidden truth is that the same consciousness that spoke through Jesus has continued speaking through other vehicles, each time adapting the message to the spiritual needs and cultural context of different eras. The journey of recognizing this pattern reveals something profound about how spiritual evolution operates on a planetary scale. Rather than depending on a single religious institution to preserve truth, consciousness itself ensures that authentic spiritual guidance remains available through dedicated souls who are willing to challenge existing structures when they become obstacles to genuine spiritual development. Now, I want to explore what Casey revealed about the true purpose of religion, according to Jesus' actual intentions, because understanding why he never meant to establish a new institutional faith completely transforms how we approach spiritual community and authentic spiritual authority in our own lives. Write in the comments, Jesus never left, if you're beginning to understand how the Christ consciousness has been guiding humanity's spiritual evolution throughout history, through multiple incarnations. The transformation in understanding Jesus' true mission reveals something that completely revolutionizes how we think about organized religion itself. According to Casey's profound revelations, Jesus never intended to found a new religion at all. Behind the scenes of his entire ministry was a completely different agenda. He came to restore humanity's direct connection to divine consciousness that had been lost through centuries of materialistic thinking and priestly manipulation. This insight reveals one of the most disturbing truths about spiritual history. Institutional religion often becomes the enemy of the very spirituality it claims to represent. The journey from Jesus' authentic teachings to the complex religious structures we see today represents a systematic transformation from direct spiritual experience to mediated religious dependency. Think about the impact this has on your entire approach to spiritual seeking. The hidden truth is that Jesus was actually trying to eliminate the barriers that religious institutions create between individuals and their direct experience of divine consciousness. His decisions to challenge the religious authorities of his time weren't rebellious acts. They were necessary corrections to spiritual systems that had become obstacles to authentic spiritual development. The mindset shift this creates is extraordinary. Instead of looking for the right religion to join, you begin understanding that genuine spiritual truth transcends any single institutional framework. What Casey discovered through his readings was that every authentic spiritual tradition contains fragments of the universal truths that Jesus taught, but no single religion has preserved them completely. This understanding promotes genuine spiritual unity, while simultaneously explaining the limitations and conflicts that exist between different religious institutions. Behind the scenes of religious competition and sectarian division lies this hidden reality. All genuine spiritual paths are attempting to preserve and transmit pieces of the same universal wisdom that Jesus originally demonstrated. The journey of recognizing these fragments across different traditions transforms how you approach spiritual learning. Instead of defending one particular religious system against all others, you begin appreciating how various wisdom traditions complement each other in preserving different aspects of the complete spiritual teaching that Jesus embodied. This revelation explains why mystics from different religious backgrounds often sound remarkably similar when they describe their direct spiritual experiences, while the institutional structures they emerge from seem completely incompatible. The authentic spiritual core remains consistent across traditions, but the organizational frameworks that develop around these truths often become sources of separation rather than unity. The behind-the-scenes reality is that Jesus was attempting to create not another religion, but a universal awakening to the divine consciousness that exists within every soul, regardless of their cultural or religious background. Now, I want to explore what Casey revealed about the current era we're living in, because according to these readings, we're not waiting for Jesus to return and establish God's kingdom. We're actually living in the time when humanity is meant to awaken en masse to the same Christ consciousness that Jesus demonstrated 2,000 years ago. Write in the comments, all paths lead home, if you're beginning to recognize how authentic spiritual wisdom appears across different traditions as fragments of the same universal truth. The transformation in understanding our current historical moment reveals something extraordinary about the spiritual evolution happening right now around the world. Rather than passively waiting for Jesus to return and establish God's kingdom on earth, Casey's readings revealed that humanity is actually living in the time specifically designed for mass awakening to the same Christ consciousness that Jesus demonstrated 2,000 years ago. This completely shifts your mindset from waiting for external salvation to actively participating in collective spiritual evolution. Behind the scenes of the religious expectations that keep people looking toward the sky for rescue lies this hidden truth. The second coming isn't about Jesus returning as an external savior. It's about millions of individual souls awakening to their own Christ consciousness and expressing it through their daily lives. Think about the profound impact this has on your sense of spiritual responsibility. The journey isn't about maintaining faith until Jesus returns to fix the world's problems. It's about recognizing that you're living during the most significant spiritual transformation in human history, and your individual awakening contributes to a collective shift in consciousness that represents the true fulfillment of Jesus' original mission. The behind-the-scenes reality is that the souls incarnating during this current era have specifically chosen to be here for this mass awakening process. Reading 489739 revealed something crucial about what's required for those ready to embody Christ consciousness in our time. They must integrate spiritual wisdom with practical service, just as Jesus did during his Palestinian ministry. This practical approach ensures that spiritual development remains grounded in real-world application, rather than becoming abstract mysticism that has no impact on how you actually live. The hidden truth is that authentic Christ consciousness doesn't manifest through religious performance or mystical experiences alone. It expresses through the consistent integration of spiritual principles into every aspect of your daily existence. The transformation that Casey described requires making conscious decisions to express unconditional love through healing others, teaching spiritual principles through your example, and serving humanity regardless of people's religious beliefs or backgrounds. This isn't about perfection or religious performance. It's about consistently choosing love over fear, service over selfishness, and unity over separation in your practical interactions with the world. What makes this current era so remarkable is how many souls are simultaneously awakening to this understanding and beginning to express Christ consciousness through their unique talents, professions, and life circumstances. The journey of individual awakening contributes to a planetary transformation that represents the ultimate goal of Jesus' original teachings. Now, I want to reveal something that will completely transform how you approach your own spiritual development, because what Casey discovered about becoming a living prayer provides a practical framework for embodying Christ consciousness that integrates seamlessly into your existing life, rather than requiring you to abandon your responsibilities or join religious institutions. Write in the comments, "I'm part of the awakening," if you're beginning to understand that your individual spiritual development contributes to the collective Christ consciousness emergence happening worldwide. The transformation that Casey revealed about authentic spiritual practice goes far beyond anything taught in traditional religious settings. The process he described involves becoming what he called a living prayer, where your entire life becomes an expression of the spiritual principles Jesus demonstrated, not through religious performance or ceremonial activities, but through the consistent choices you make every day to choose love over fear in real-world situations. This completely transforms how you approach spiritual development. Behind the scenes of traditional Christianity's emphasis on church attendance, religious rituals, and formal prayers lies this hidden truth. Authentic spirituality isn't something you do during specific religious moments. It's something you become through continuous integration of divine consciousness into every aspect of your existence. Think about the profound impact this has on your daily mindset. The journey of becoming a living prayer means that your morning interactions with family members, your decisions at work, your responses to challenging situations, and even your thoughts during routine activities become opportunities for expressing the same loving awareness that Jesus embodied. This practical approach ensures that spiritual development becomes woven into the fabric of ordinary life, rather than remaining separate from your daily experience. The hidden truth is that Christ consciousness doesn't require you to withdraw from the world or abandon your responsibilities. It transforms how you engage with everything you're already doing. What makes this understanding so revolutionary is how it reframes every single encounter you have. Understanding these authentic teachings that emerged from Casey's readings makes every conversation an opportunity to practice Christ consciousness. Every moment when you choose forgiveness over resentment becomes a step toward the same spiritual mastery that Jesus exemplified during his ministry. The behind-the-scenes reality is that spiritual evolution happens through countless small decisions rather than dramatic religious experiences. Every time you respond with patience instead of irritation, every moment you choose understanding over judgment, every decision to serve others rather than focus solely on personal gain becomes part of your ongoing transformation into the same consciousness that Jesus achieved. This practical application removes the artificial separation between spiritual life and ordinary existence that characterizes so much religious thinking. The journey of spiritual development doesn't require special locations, formal ceremonies, or religious intermediaries. It happens through the conscious choices you make in grocery stores, offices, traffic jams, and family dinners. The transformation occurs through recognizing that every human interaction provides an opportunity to express divine love. Every challenging situation offers a chance to demonstrate spiritual principles, and every moment of daily life becomes a classroom for developing the same consciousness that Jesus embodied. Now, I want to explore the ultimate goal that Casey revealed about Jesus' true mission, because what he discovered about creating other Christs rather than gathering followers completely transforms our understanding of what authentic Christianity was always meant to accomplish in human consciousness. Write in the comments, "My life is my prayer," if you're ready to transform every aspect of your daily existence into continuous spiritual practice. The most profound revelation to emerge from all of Casey's channeled information about Jesus completely revolutionizes everything we think we know about Christianity's ultimate purpose. The hidden truth that Casey discovered is this: Jesus' message was never meant to create followers who would spend eternity worshiping him. It was designed to create other Christs, other beings capable of expressing the same divine consciousness he had achieved through his own spiritual evolution. This fundamental shift transforms the entire purpose of religion, from devotion to transformation, from creating followers to developing equals. Think about the extraordinary impact this has on your spiritual mindset. Behind the scenes of traditional Christianity's emphasis on worship and praise lies this revolutionary understanding that Jesus came to show you what you could become, not to establish himself as a permanent object of veneration. The journey that Jesus modeled wasn't about gathering people who would remain spiritually dependent on his intercession forever. It was about demonstrating a level of consciousness that every soul could eventually achieve through dedicated spiritual development. The decision to position Jesus as uniquely divine while portraying humanity as inherently fallen has obscured this empowering truth for nearly 2 millennia. But here's where the implications become absolutely staggering. If Jesus achieved Christ consciousness through multiple lifetimes of spiritual development, exactly as Casey's readings revealed, then the same potential exists within every soul walking this planet. This completely democratizes spiritual potential, removing the artificial hierarchies that organized religion has constructed and making divine consciousness a realistic goal for all humanity. The transformation in understanding this creates is extraordinary. Instead of viewing Jesus as impossibly distant, you begin recognizing him as the ultimate proof of what human consciousness can accomplish through persistent spiritual evolution. Every soul possesses the same divine essence that Jesus successfully awakened. The only difference is the degree of development and the number of lifetimes invested in spiritual growth. This revelation removes every excuse for spiritual complacency and eliminates the comfort of religious dependency. The behind-the-scenes reality is that you're not meant to remain a spiritual child forever, looking upward for salvation from someone else's achievement. You're meant to follow the same path of inner development that transformed an ordinary soul into the perfect expression of divine love. The hidden truth that emerges from this understanding is that Christ consciousness isn't Jesus's exclusive possession. It's humanity's collective destiny. Every act of unconditional love you express, every moment of forgiveness you offer, every decision to serve others becomes part of your own journey toward the same spiritual mastery that Jesus demonstrated in Palestine. Now, I want to explore what this means for your personal spiritual development, because understanding that Jesus demonstrated what you can become through dedication fundamentally changes how you approach every spiritual practice, every challenging situation, and every opportunity for growth in your own life. Write in the comments, "I can become like Jesus," if you're ready to embrace the same spiritual potential that Jesus came to reveal exists within every human soul. The transformation in understanding your true nature reaches its ultimate depth when you grasp what Jesus actually demonstrated through his crucifixion and resurrection. He wasn't just proving his unique divinity, he was showing definitively that death has no power over consciousness, revealing that all souls are eternal beings, having temporary physical experiences rather than physical beings having temporary spiritual experiences. This understanding fundamentally changes how you view everything about existence itself. Behind the scenes of humanity's obsession with material success, physical security, and worldly achievement lies this hidden truth. Your essential self is indestructible consciousness that merely inhabits physical form for learning purposes. The journey through material existence isn't about accumulating possessions or even extending physical life. It's about awakening to your eternal nature while temporarily experiencing limitation. Think about the profound impact this has on your daily decisions and priorities. When you truly understand that you are consciousness experiencing physicality rather than a physical being occasionally having spiritual thoughts, every aspect of life takes on different meaning. The fears that dominate most human thinking, fear of death, fear of loss, fear of not having enough, begin dissolving when you recognize that your true self cannot be destroyed or diminished. But Casey's revelations go even deeper than demonstrating consciousness survival. What emerged from his readings reveals something extraordinary about human nature itself. We're not fallen creatures, desperately needing rescue from some cosmic mistake. We're divine souls temporarily forgetting our true nature and slowly remembering our way back to conscious unity with universal love. This completely positive view of human nature supports spiritual growth through remembrance rather than through guilt, fear, and dependence. The behind-the-scenes reality is that every challenge you face, every limitation you encounter, every moment of suffering you experience is actually designed to help you remember what you truly are beneath the temporary amnesia of physical incarnation. The transformation this creates in your approach to spiritual development is extraordinary. Instead of trying to become something you're not, you're remembering something you've always been. Instead of earning divine approval through religious performance, you're awakening to the divine nature that has never left you. The journey becomes one of removing obstacles to love rather than acquiring spiritual qualifications. The hidden truth that emerges from this understanding is that every soul is already perfect at its core. The spiritual path is simply about clearing away the accumulated beliefs, fears, and habits that obscure that inherent perfection. Every moment of forgiveness removes a barrier. Every act of compassion reveals more of your true nature. Every decision to choose love over fear brings you closer to remembering who you really are. Now, I want to explore how these revelations transform not just individual spiritual development, but the entire future of human consciousness, because what Casey revealed about this current era suggests we're living during the most significant spiritual awakening in human history. Write in the comments, "I am remembering," if you're beginning to understand that spiritual growth is about awakening to the divine nature you've always possessed, rather than becoming something new. the transformation that emerges from understanding these revelations about Jesus goes far beyond reforming religious doctrine. It represents a complete revolution in how you approach spiritual truth itself. What Casey channeled offers something that institutional Christianity has never been able to provide: spirituality based on direct experience rather than institutional authority, personal transformation rather than external salvation, and universal love rather than religious exclusivity. This approach fundamentally empowers you to validate spiritual truth through your own personal experience rather than accepting it through faith alone or institutional decree. Think about the profound shift in mindset this creates. Behind the scenes of religious authority lies this hidden truth: you don't need any external organization to confirm or validate your spiritual experiences. You can develop the capacity to recognize authentic spiritual truth through your own inner development. The journey of direct spiritual experience eliminates the dependency that organized religion deliberately cultivates. Instead of remaining spiritually passive, waiting for religious authorities to interpret divine will for you, you become an active participant in discovering what genuine spirituality actually involves. The decision to pursue direct experience rather than mediated religion transforms you from a follower into a spiritual explorer capable of independent spiritual discovery. But here's what makes these revelations so threatening to established religious power structures. Jesus' actual message remains as revolutionary today as it was 2,500 years ago when it first challenged the religious authorities of his time. The continued resistance to these teachings reveals something disturbing about how deeply entrenched institutional interests oppose authentic spiritual empowerment and individual development. The behind-the-scenes reality is that religious institutions depend on spiritual dependence to maintain their authority and financial support. When people understand that they can access divine consciousness directly, develop spiritual abilities through personal practice, and validate spiritual truth through their own experience, the entire foundation of institutional religious control begins crumbling. This explains why authentic spiritual teachings consistently face opposition from organized religion throughout history. The transformation that occurs when individuals begin experiencing direct spiritual connection threatens every system that profits from spiritual intermediation. The impact of these revelations extends far beyond personal spiritual growth. They represent a fundamental challenge to religious authority that has shaped human consciousness for millennia. The hidden truth is that Jesus' original teachings were designed to create spiritually independent individuals capable of direct divine connection, not dependent followers requiring institutional salvation. Every attempt to restore these authentic teachings faces the same resistance that Jesus himself encountered from the religious establishments of his era. Now, I want to explore something that will completely transform how you view the current spiritual awakening happening worldwide, because what Casey revealed suggests that we're witnessing the fulfillment of Jesus' original vision for humanity's spiritual evolution on a scale that has never been possible before in human history. Write in the comments, "I choose direct experience," if you're ready to pursue authentic spirituality through personal transformation rather than institutional authority. The transformation that becomes possible when you truly understand these revelations extends far beyond individual spiritual development. It opens up a vision of what Christianity itself could become if religious institutions embraced Jesus' actual teachings. Imagine Christianity completely transformed, where churches taught spiritual development rather than religious dependence, focusing on creating other Christs rather than maintaining worshipful followers who remain spiritually passive throughout their entire lives. This vision represents the potential evolution of religious institutions from control mechanisms designed to generate dependency into genuine spiritual development centers that empower individuals to achieve the same consciousness that Jesus demonstrated. Think about the profound impact this would have on human consciousness. Behind the scenes of current religious practice lies this hidden possibility: spiritual communities dedicated to awakening divine potential within every member, rather than extracting devotion toward distant divine figures. The journey toward this transformed Christianity would require religious leaders to make fundamental decisions about whether they truly want to serve spiritual evolution or maintain institutional power. The mindset shift required would be extraordinary, moving from teaching people to worship Jesus to teaching them how to become like Jesus through dedicated spiritual practice and inner development. But here's where the implications become absolutely staggering for the future of human consciousness itself. What would happen if more people understood that Jesus came not to be worshipped, but to show humanity what everyone could become through dedicated spiritual practice? The behind-the-scenes reality is that this mass understanding could trigger the spiritual revolution that Casey said was always Jesus's true intention for human consciousness. The transformation that would occur if millions of people simultaneously awakened to their own Christ potential would represent the most significant shift in human evolution since consciousness first appeared on this planet. Instead of looking upward for salvation, humanity would begin looking inward for transformation. Instead of waiting for divine intervention, people would start expressing divine consciousness through their own lives. This mass awakening would fundamentally alter every aspect of human civilization. The hidden truth is that when people understand they possess the same spiritual potential that Jesus demonstrated, everything about how society operates begins changing. Political systems based on control lose their power over spiritually awakened individuals. Economic structures built on scarcity consciousness cannot survive when people recognize their inherent abundance. Social hierarchies dissolve when everyone understands their equal divine nature. The journey toward this collective awakening has already begun, with increasing numbers of people discovering these authentic teachings and beginning to practice direct spiritual development rather than religious dependency. Now, I want to explore what Casey revealed about how this spiritual revolution will actually unfold. Because understanding the cosmic scope of Jesus's mission and your role as a conscious co-creator in this transformation will completely change how you approach your own spiritual development and service to humanity. Write in the comments, the revolution is beginning. If you can envision how mass awakening to Christ consciousness could transform not just religion, but all of human civilization. The transformation in understanding that emerges from Casey's profound revelations reveals something crucial about the nature of the questions we've been exploring together. These aren't merely theological debates or abstract spiritual concepts with no practical relevance to your daily life. Behind the scenes of what might seem like religious philosophy lies this hidden truth. These revelations point directly toward the spiritual revolution that Casey said was always Jesus's true intention for humanity's evolution. The practical implications of this understanding extend far beyond religious reform or church restructuring. We're talking about fundamental changes in how humanity understands its purpose, its potential, and its relationship to the divine consciousness that permeates all existence. Think about the extraordinary impact this has on every decision you make, every relationship you nurture, every challenge you face in your personal journey through life. The mindset shift that occurs when you recognize yourself as a divine soul, temporarily experiencing physical limitation, changes everything about how you approach problems, opportunities, and interactions with others. Instead of feeling overwhelmed by the complexity of human existence, you begin understanding that every experience is designed to help you remember and express the same consciousness that Jesus achieved through his own spiritual evolution. But here's what makes this revelation truly revolutionary in its scope and potential. The documented wisdom that emerged from Casey's Jesus readings doesn't diminish Christ's significance or reduce his importance in human spiritual development. Instead, it reveals the cosmic scope of his mission and invites you to participate consciously as a co-creator, rather than remaining a passive believer waiting for external salvation. This ultimate understanding transforms you from someone who believes in Jesus to someone who actively participates in the ongoing spiritual evolution that Jesus initiated and continues to guide through his multiple incarnations throughout history. The behind-the-scenes reality is that you're not just a spectator, watching spiritual evolution unfold. You're a conscious participant whose individual awakening contributes to the collective transformation of human consciousness. The journey of recognizing your role as a co-creator in this cosmic plan eliminates the spiritual helplessness that characterizes so much religious thinking. Instead of feeling small and insignificant in the face of divine majesty, you begin understanding that your spiritual development matters on a planetary scale, that your choices impact the collective awakening, and that your individual transformation contributes to the fulfillment of Jesus's original vision for humanity. Now, I want to share something that will help you understand exactly how to begin participating consciously in this ongoing spiritual revolution, because recognizing the cosmic scope of what's happening is just the beginning. The real transformation begins when you start applying these principles in practical ways that awaken Christ consciousness within your own daily experience. Write in the comments, "I'm ready to co-create," if you understand that your individual spiritual development contributes to the collective awakening that represents the true fulfillment of Jesus's mission. The transformation that becomes possible when you begin consciously participating in this spiritual revolution extends into every aspect of your existence, turning ordinary moments into opportunities for expressing the same divine consciousness that Jesus came to awaken within humanity. The journey we've explored together today represents just the beginning of understanding how these profound revelations can reshape not only your personal spiritual development, but your role in the collective awakening happening worldwide. If you've made it this far in our exploration of Edgar Cayce's revolutionary teachings about Jesus, it tells me something important about your spiritual readiness and genuine desire for authentic truth rather than comfortable religious platitudes. The fact that you're willing to consider these challenging revelations suggests that you're part of the growing number of souls who are ready to move beyond passive belief into active spiritual development. I created this channel specifically for people like you, individuals who are hungry for spiritual truth that empowers rather than restricts, who want practical guidance for awakening Christ consciousness rather than abstract theological discussions that lead nowhere. Each video I share builds on these foundations, exploring different aspects of authentic spirituality and providing concrete steps for your own transformation journey. If these revelations have resonated with something deep within your consciousness, I'd love to hear from you. Write in the comments, "This message was meant for me." That way I'll know you stayed with me through this entire exploration and that you're ready to dive even deeper into these life-changing teachings. The connection we've created through exploring these profound truths deserves to be acknowledged. So if this content has shifted something in your understanding, a simple like tells me that this information is reaching the right people at the right time. Your engagement helps ensure that these authentic teachings reach other souls who are ready for this level of spiritual truth. There's a video right here that complements everything we've discovered today, exploring practical techniques for awakening the same spiritual abilities that Jesus demonstrated. Click and continue with me over there. The journey of conscious co-creation with divine evolution is just beginning.